The following Patreon episode is brought to you by our patrons over at patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg. Here to tell you why it's important to become a patron is our favorite guest, Cam Mallow. Cam, why should they become a patron?
It's important to help bring more new episodes.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks, Cam. So if you want to become a patron, go to patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg and become one today. We thank you in advance.
Okay, so we're going to get ready to start the program. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and supporting the Farnsworth House Civil War Sunday evening lecture series, something like that. I still don't have a catchy name for what we do on Sunday nights. So this Sunday we're going to talk about Jennie Wade, and as mentioned in the description for this, maybe you noticed that I'll have to look back and see when I started doing these programs for the Farnsworth House, but ever since I started, maybe 10 years or so ago, every year I do a Jennie Wade program of some sort. So I sort of mix it up. We're talking about maybe the last time I did Jennie Wade, well, we didn't have any programs last year because of COVID, but 2 years ago, I think we probably talked about Jennie Wade's love life. So this might be more interesting for military buffs. We're going to talk more about the circumstances surrounding her death. Now, next week, there will be a program. I have not figured out what the topic is for my program next week. The way the weekends fall in February, I can't do a program on Valentine's Day weekend because we're really packed in here during that weekend. And I can't do a program on President's Day weekend because we're really packed in here on President's Day weekend. Oh.
That's a good ring to it.
Yeah. He said, what was it again? Sunday Sweeney Smith stories. So I only have 2 programs weekends for February, but of course we also have in February, you might know that we're doing a live broadcast. Is it live or we're doing a broadcast?
Recording in front of a live.
It's going to be a recording in front of a live studio audience of Addressing Gettysburg, and the topic is going to be the movie Gettysburg. And we're going to talk to some people who were involved in the making of the movie and some people who've watched the movie a lot and talk about the finer details of the movie. And do we still have openings for that, or are we pretty much sold out?
No, it's sold out.
It's sold out? Excellent. So that's actually coming up in February also. So we have 3 programs here in February. If you count that, and you can listen to that, of course, at Addressing Gettysburg. You can find that on Facebook or Patreon or anywhere. I'm sure you can find it. But our 2 programs for February, I don't know exactly which is which, but I do know that one of them I'm going to do an installment of something I've been wanting to do for a long time called Gettysburg Errata. And, I think it would be fun. It would be really fun for me to critique different books on the Battle of Gettysburg. And I thought about it for a long time. It'd be fun to do. I don't want to critique anybody's book that just came out or that I know or that I don't like. So I thought, you know what I'll do? I'll only do, that's a lot of people, right? I'll only do dead authors. So people who aren't around anymore. And I can describe some of the problems with their works. So I'm going to pick ones that are not controversial, that everybody agrees are really bad. You know what I've learned, and I think it took me a long time to realize this. I enjoy reading a really bad book on the battle as much as I do a really good book on the battle. Because when you read something that's really bad, it makes you think. And it makes you think, why do I think that's wrong? And then you check the source, and it solidifies your knowledge by reading things that are filled with mistakes. I really like it, and I like the concept of it. So I think what I'm going to do is I'll pick, and I know the first book I'm going to pick to discuss, and it'll be really fun. We'll read it together, and we'll discuss some of the issues in it. So it's, in case you're anticipating what it is, it's going to be the Gettysburg Autotronic Tour of the Battlefield by the Wolf family. The Wolf family tour book of the battlefield. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's awesome. So can't wait for that. Okay, but getting back to tonight's program, I thought we'd talk about Jennie Wade and the circumstances surrounding her death. So I'm only going to talk about, I'm going to focus in on Jennie Wade. Now at the end of the program, if anybody has any questions they'd like for me to talk about or answer, I'm more than happy to do this, because I am the self-proclaimed world's greatest authority on the life and times of Jennie Wade. So I'd be more than happy to talk about it. But in this program, things we are not going to talk about. We will not talk about whether her name is Jennie or whether her name is Jennie. Somebody just asked me that. We will not talk about her family issues and problems and how her father is in jail and then in the insane asylum. And I probably won't talk about the romance between Jack and Jennie and the message supposedly that was carried by Wesley to her. And I know it hurts me a lot, but I will not talk about my collection of Jennie Wade dough trays, which is one of the largest on this continent. And we will not talk about my Jennie Wade doll collection. Although, I do have a couple of Jennie Wade dolls in display in the case down the hallway there. If you haven't been down the hallway there towards the bathrooms down there, I put a new Jennie Wade doll in that case just recently, if you haven't checked it out. Okay. Oh, there she is. That's the new doll I put in the case.
That's creepy.
Yeah. Yeah. This one was actually popularized in the 1990s by the Servants. Remember the Servants had a shop up on Steinway Avenue. They moved into Gilbert's Hobby Shop after he went out of business. And they actually sold, Georgia Servant made a limited edition Jennie Wade doll. Whoop. Oh, I guess I'm back to this one. Okay. So the first thing I thought I'd do is talk a little bit about this area and what it was like at the time of the battle. And if anybody here has been on my walking tour that I give of the town or Cemetery Hill, I hand out a map in which I discuss the different buildings that were here in the area at the time and where they were located to give you a sense of the battlefield. So this is the 1872 atlas. The town of Gettysburg is in the back of the atlas. And I took it, and I'll break it into two portions. And I actually labeled some of the houses that aren't labeled on it. You can see in the middle of the map is Baltimore Street. And we are at the home, the Farnsworth house is, on this map, Miss Elizabeth Dennison Sweeney, who later married a Yount and died in Washington, D.C. And then her mother took it over. But Elizabeth Sweeney was the daughter of Harvey Sweeney, who had died in 1871. So this is the 1872 atlas. And Harvey Sweeney and his wife did not really get along, so in his will, he bypassed his wife and gave everything to his daughter, Elizabeth. And then, of course, she died, and everything went to her mother. So it ended up with Catherine Sweeney anyway. Across the street, of course, is the J. Weinbrenner on this map. That's John Weinbrenner, who owns the house that is now Mr. G's old-fashioned homemade ice cream. And you can see in front of the house is Lefevre Street. And then the street running off to the south of that is the portion of the old Baltimore Pike that runs at the base of East Cemetery Hill. Directly across, of course, is almost directly across Samuel McCreary, and he owned a brickyard. And of course, on this map, I actually have a little red block for where the brick manufacturer is on the map. A little farther south up the street is the Solomon Welty house. And I'm pointing these out because, of course, I'm going to show photographs that some of these houses appear in. Solomon Welty's house still stands. It's part of a building that is part of the Brick House Bed and Breakfast. But I want you to notice that south of the Solomon Welty house, there is basically just a big open field leading all the way up to the bottom of the map where it says McClellan. And of course, McClellan is Georgia Wade McClellan, Jennie Wade's sister, who rents a house owned by John Houck. At the intersection where the convenience store now is, we have the Battlefield Hotel. And that was here at the time of the battle. It was known as the Wagon Hotel. When we talk about commercialism in our program a few weeks ago, it's interesting to me that the owners of the Wagon Hotel renamed it the Battlefield Hotel almost immediately after the battle. So they had a vision that people would want to stay at a hotel named after the battlefield. Across the street, you see Frazier. Melinda Frazier lived in a little log house that is really, today, basically where the Avenue restaurant is, or May's. What's it called? May's Noodle House now, currently, isn't it? And then you can see above that is the Tawney house. I think it's off the top of my head, boy, is it John Tawney? But Tawney lived there with his family. And then, of course, on Baltimore Street, north of that, you see the home of John Rupp. And the Rupp family, of course, this house is going to appear in many images. Rupp owns a tannery complex, and just north of that, you can see the tannery complex, which occupies most of the ground between the Rupp house and the Sweeney house where we are located. Now, those houses there, from the Rupp House north, are all occupied by Southern soldiers during the battle. And the Battlefield Hotel and some of the buildings south of it are all, Union occupied during the fighting. And you can see the Battlefield Hotel intersection, again, and then you see the McClellan house. Of course, I should probably call that the Houck house. John Houck, the guy who owns Devil's Den, owned that house at the time of the battle and owned many rental properties in town. He actually had the house split, and half the house was rented by the McClellans, Georgia Wade McClellan and her husband, John Lewis McClellan, and then south of it was the McLean family. And then there was an alley, and there was another house that stood right now in the middle of what is the Tour Center parking lot, and that's the house owned by Conrad Schneider. Conrad Schneider had died in 1861, I believe, and his widow and a bunch of children, maybe 7 or 8 children, lived there with his widow at the time. And on Steinway Avenue, under like where the, just a little bit south of O'Rourke's, there was the Ogden House, and then a little bit farther towards maybe where Cafe, what do they call it, 81 is located, a little coffee house there, across from the Dobbin House. Oh, it's not even as far as the Dobbin House, you can see on this map though, but it's the Philby House. Now Samuel Philby is Jennie Wade's granddad, in case you didn't know. One odd fact, if you want to store away odd facts, is that Jennie Wade's grandparents live a short distance from her at the time of the battle, and that never seems to fit into the story. And her brother Sam is staying with the grandparents at the time of the battle, theoretically. And then we have the Dobbin House you see down there on this map, 72, owned by a guy named Heck. It was owned by Conrad Schneider, and then he had died and it got sold to James Pierce, Tilly Pierce's father, at the time of the battle. You see Dr. David Stude's house on the Baltimore Turnpike, a little bit up. That actually is right where the hoof, fin, and fowl is located today. The Stude house was right on that site. And then as we get closer to the National Cemetery, you see the Myers House at the time of the battle, which by 1872 was a Soldiers' National Orphanage. And then a little bit up farther, you can see part of the Evergreen Cemetery and the Evergreen Cemetery Gatehouse, which at that time was occupied by the Thorne family. So that's basically the area that we're talking about. And where the first map showed more this area, which is held by the Southern Army on July 2nd and 3rd, this is the area held by the Union Army on July 2nd and 3rd. So one of the important points, I think, to make here is that there are structures and houses that are shown on this map. We also have barns and outbuildings at the back of these properties. But the area between the McClellan house, where Jennie Wade is ultimately killed, and the Solomon Welty and Rupp house is pretty much wide open at that time. Here is a photograph, of course, part of the series of photographs that was taken by the Tyson brothers, local photographers, probably with the help of their young assistant, William Tipton, on November 19th, 1863. And boy, are we fortunate for this series of views. There are 3 views that we're talking about. The Tysons could have easily sent their camera up somewhere else, like in the cemetery, to get a photograph of the dedication. But instead, they chose to put their camera right in front of the Jennie Wade house or the McClellan house, or however you want to refer to it. They set up the camera right on the high ground in front of the house. Have you ever walked up to the Jennie Wade house and you walk up the sidewalk and there's a mound and the house sits up on a little mound with Jennie Wade's statue in front of it? That little mound, or that little rise of ground, was there at the time. And you can see from the camera angle that just a few feet in front of it, where the Holiday Inn is, the ground is much lower. So the house sat on a little hill. Now I mention this because we have no views from the town looking up to the Jennie Wade house sitting on this little rise of ground. But basically, on the right side of the road where the Holiday Inn is now located, I will never call it whatever they want me to call it now. Let's call it the Holiday Inn that no longer has its Holiday Inn license. The Inn's a 63. So that empty space, there's nothing there. It's a big empty space from the Jennie Wade house to which the edge of the town, and the house sits on top of a rise of ground. How much of a target are the people in that house going to be because of the way the area is laid out? But we're fortunate that the Tysons decided to record views from this little hill in front of the Jennie Wade house because it gives us a great view of what the town looked like in front of them. And on the right, that's the Solomon Welty house, and then behind it is the Samuel McCreary house, and then behind that is the John Weinbrenner house, the 3 houses on the right, and on the left we have the John Rupp house. And of course this view also shows us that those 4 houses were built by the same person, and they're all the same general construction. Some are wood, some are brick, but they're all the general construction. Here is, I didn't want to show too much of it, but here is one of the views that's rarely seen with people in the street of the same view. Of course, this is the only known copy of it is owned by William Frastinito. So this one I highlighted the crowd coming up the street and there's the Farnsworth house in the view, and you can see. Now, I've been outside in the beer garden on occasion, and on occasion, a ghost tour has stopped in front of the house, and I've heard their authoritative, discussion about the Farnsworth house and Jennie Wade. And, I honestly, realize that we don't know where the bullet came from that killed Jennie Wade. Oh, should I answer the question? I didn't answer the question. Who shot Jennie Wade? I don't know. I have no clue.
Great program.
What's interesting about it is I would say that the bullet could have come from the Farnsworth house. It could have come from the Farnsworth house. I have no proof that it didn't come from the Farnsworth house. But to hear some of these people talk out there, oh, it could not have possibly come from the Farnsworth house window like they say. And then they give reasons why. There's one guy, reenactor, ghost tour guide. I don't know if he reenacts ghosts, but he's out there, he's telling people that they used Enfield rifles and the range of the Enfield rifle was inferior and could not reach the Jennie Wade house from the Farnsworth house window. What? He gives a lecture on this out there. You know how far it is from the window to the... It's 200 yards. It's 612 feet. So is that 200 yards? Am I exact?
Yeah,
300?
Maybe 200.
200. So anyway, 612 feet. It can reach that far. You could fire from the Schreiber house and hit that door from up there. And that's another place that often is stated as the location of the shot. But it could be the Farnsworth house. And everything I'm going to tell you tonight in this slideshow, nothing precludes the Farnsworth house from being the site of the shot. Look, and this photograph is taken from this right in front of the house or right next to the side of the house, a few feet from where the bullet traveled. And look, there's nothing between that window and the house. I think today, because the Holiday Inn, again, the Holiday Inn, is in the way, people think the bullet could not have traveled up the street there, but the Holiday Inn was not there. So here's a third of a different view we're talking about. And again, there's the Farnsworth house. The other thing about it is that, I'm going to talk about this, the first reference to where the bullet came from was really a study done by the associates of John White Johnston, and may have come from Robert Miller, the guy who did the tours of the Jennie Wade house starting in 1901. But they said, they didn't say the bullet came from the edge of the town. They said, without a doubt, the bullet came from the office of the tannery. And that is the office of the tannery right there. And you see that window? So that's what they're saying. The bullet came from there. So the earliest references we have that they name a specific site is that building and supposedly that window. And let me just suggest that, we have the letter by John Rupp. The whole tannery complex is filled with Confederate sharpshooters during the battle. And as I said before, do you see I highlighted the roof line of one of the tannery buildings? I'll bet you on the back side of that roof, there are sharpshooters firing over the peak of the roof towards the northern sharpshooters in the Battlefield Hotel. And the northern sharpshooters are firing back. And that's one of the reasons the top half of the Farnsworth house is so perforated with bullets from the fighting because of the sharpshooters firing at the tannery and hitting people or hitting the wall instead of hitting people. Now, also let me mention it. Okay, let's say that they're accurate and the bullet did come from that area. Look right above it. The bullet could have come from the Farnsworth house or one of these sharpshooters in the tannery or one of the sharpshooters around the tannery or around the... And everything about the lining up of the bullets and where it came from, to me, indicates that it came from this area. To me. but we'll talk about that later. I just threw a colorized version in there. I should colorize it again because, you know, every week it seems like when you colorize something at the MyHeritage, their color gets better and better and better. Did anybody see the photograph that the Historical Society just put up this week of Woodrow Wilson coming out of the tent at the Great Reunion? I discovered that photograph. Brand new photograph. Did you see it and say, wow?
Oh, wow, that's it.
Okay, well, the colorization on that, the colorization on that is much better, and there's no reds and oranges and pinks in it. See, they get a little, at first they were getting a little bit too much purple in their colorization. But here, in this open view of the streets, the point is how open the ground is between the McClellan house or the Jennie Wade house and the buildings at the edge of the town. And I think that looking just a general consensus, you know, lining up the bullet holes and trying to figure out where the path of the bullet is and the rise of the bullet, it came from somewhere in this photograph. I think we all agree on that. Okay? Oh, Kayla, could I have a water? I forgot to get a water. Oh, so in case you're wondering, this is a modern view of the same scene in that previous photograph. So that's what we're dealing with. Yeah. Talk about a big structure that should be torn down. Question? I'm just teasing. Question?
Question mark, you said.
Oh, question. Good. Oh. Okay. Let's see. Oh, I don't know. Oh, so I blew it up a little bit so you can see the field where the Holiday Inn is. And the first house on the right is the Solomon Welty house. Boy, do I wish I had a nice account by Solomon Welty telling us something about the sharpshooters in his house. That's one where we really don't have much to go on. But we do have, you know, the Rupp Tannery, and we have that wonderful letter that John Rupp wrote to his sister-in-law on, I believe, July 19th, 1863. And in the letter, it mentions that Jennie Wade was killed while she was making bread for the soldiers. In the letter, she mentions that. We should never doubt that fact that she was making bread for the soldiers. So in John White Johnston's book, Jennie Wade, you know, a Gettysburg maiden, he actually has a map where he draws the McClellan house and he puts some, it's not exactly accurate. He doesn't have the exact buildings on it that in their true locations. But you get an idea of the buildings we're talking about, and you get the idea that he also has the bullet coming from the Rupp Tannery office. Now on this map, again, which is really badly out of scale, on the left-hand side, the top structure is the Farnsworth house here on the other side of the little stream. But you notice he's got the Weinbrenner residence in the wrong place. He's got it where the McCreary house should be, and it should be up on the other side of the stream. Okay. Now, I mentioned this before, and I mentioned this in my little book on the Farnsworth house. No, I don't. I do not mention it in that book. Why did I say that? I discovered this after that book. But when I was doing research for the Farnsworth house book, I came across the fact that Loring Schultz, who owns the Farnsworth house, was really good friends with a guy named Eugene Sickles. And Eugene Sickles was an artist, a battlefield tour guide, and he did much work around the town in the tourist industry, making displays that were in different museums. As a matter of fact, Eugene Sickles did that on the back wall, a plaque that talks about Elon J. Farnsworth on the back. It's near the window there. So when he upstairs, he made a little diorama that we have in the attic showing the houses on the street at the time and the course of the bullet. And one day I was in Walt Lane's negative collection and I saw Eugene Sickles' name and it said Jennie Wade. And I found these negatives in there. He had maps that he had drawn that are obviously intended to be in a book he was writing on Jennie Wade. A book that never came out, and I've never seen any of his written manuscript. But you can see on the left, he has a map that shows where all the buildings in town are at the time. And then he has a map showing the course of the bullet from the Farnsworth house to the McCollum house, indicating that it traveled 612 feet. So, you know, right there, in the 1970s, there's this guy that is telling everyone that the bullet that killed Jennie Wade came from the window of the Farnsworth house. And that's one of the things that I'd like you to know, is that this is not something new. This is not like people just started saying the bullet came from the Farnsworth house. Here's a guy in the 1970s that is promoting this concept. And again, I can't say it's not true. And like I said, even if it came from the office of the tannery, that passes right over this spot. You know, it's just a matter then of the trajectory of the bullet, and whether it was rising or falling when it went through the door, all kinds of qualifiers. He did this cool map too, that shows, you see at the top there, that shows the flight of the bullet and how it's rising slightly. He also has a house on there called the Vance House. I have no idea who Vance is or what his reference is for that. I don't know of any Vances that ever lived in the town. But fascinating. And then, you know, we do on a regular basis take people up to the attic. We normally don't take a large group up to the attic, but if, you know, somebody really wants to go up into the attic one day and you find me here, you know, in the tavern, you can ask me, and I like going up there. So we do take people up there.
We go tonight.
No tonight. I'm taking the whole group up tonight.
Back down. For the dolls.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to hide my doll collection. I don't want you to see the Jennie Wade doll collection. So, the one thing that does bother me a little bit about, you know, when I describe all this is there is a view of the Jennie Wade house from 1867, and you can see that there are trees on the side of the house where the bullet holes are. So, can you imagine how many bullets, you know, struck limbs on the tree or struck the stump of the tree when you look at how many bullets are in the side of the Jennie Wade house? But this is the earliest known view that shows the side of the house in question and shows what it looks like. So there's a little close-up of it. 1867. And again, you can see the stones piled up there and the fence, and behind it is that little rise of ground where the cameramen put their photograph to get that image of the procession leading to the Gettysburg Address. We have a 1867 drawing of the Jennie Wade house. And this is from Harper's Weekly magazine. And maybe the trees aren't really that, in this drawing, you can see there, bullets can go around the trees. They can go through the limbs, I'm sure. But I would guess that people, Union soldiers, were hiding behind that fence. On the war map, it does kind of show that there's a fence on the side of the house, and that there could be soldiers in the bushes, behind the trees, in front of the house, drawing fire on the house during the battle. This is actually from the street side, looking towards the house. So the door where the bullet went through is on the left side of the building, around the corner from this. But I point this out because you can see there are some trees in the yard on that side of the house. But again, there are no trees in that photograph on November 19th looking from the front of the house towards the edge of the town. So, and here is a 1870s view. of the front of the Jennie Wade house. So we have a number of views of the house from the 1860s and 70s, just not the one I really want to see from the edge of the town looking up. I like this view from the 1880s because it kind of shows the lane that led up along beside the house between the Jennie Wade house and the Conrad Schneider house. And again, all these views are taken before the Jennie Wade house is a museum and open to the public. And then we do have views of the house after it becomes a museum. Again, it was opened up in 1901, I think May of 1901, and it is the oldest continuously operational museum in the town. So, still a museum. And, oh, on the fence, I don't know if you see the fence, there's a sign and it says Free Museum. Here's the Detroit postcard company, Detroit Press, and this is 1903. So there's a postcard from 1903. Now I should mention that in the 1890s, there was a house where the Holiday Inn is located. And the house was built by the Kitzmillers, and the Millers, the Mumpers lived there, and the Millers lived there. I forget exactly how it goes off the top of my head, but Anna Garlack, do you know who lived on Baltimore Street down here with her mother? Her mother, Catherine Garlack, is the one that hid Schimmelfinning in the wood pile out behind the house. Anna Garlack married Jacob Kitzmiller, and after the Civil War, maybe 1867, he bought one half of the Jennie Wade house. And then Kitzmiller had a couple daughters, and one of his daughters married a guy named Miller, who opened up the Jennie Wade house and museum in 1901, and the other daughter married Jacob Mumper, and the photographer, and Jacob Mumper was selling postcards and photographs out of a gift shop run by his brother-in-law at the Jennie Wade house. And they're the ones who really got the Jennie Wade House Museum going in 1901. But they ended up building a house on the site where the Holiday Inn now is. And the reason I mention this is because I am assuming that the reason people thought the bullet came from the tannery office, or they believed it came from the Farnsworth house, is because at one point you could go to the bullet hole and you could duck down and you could look through both bullet holes and see where the bullet came from by looking through the bullet holes. Does that make sense? But now you can't do that. How could you let somebody build a hotel in the path of the bullet hole? I know that's silly. But because the Holiday Inn's been there since 1964, we don't have an opportunity to just stand there and look through the holes. But I assume that at one point you could. I say this, I assume this because I don't think that house is in the way. I think it's set back a little bit, and hopefully that you can see around it. And I'm guessing that's why the people knew the direction of the bullet, because they just lined it up with their eyes. Here's another view of the house. It was torn down in 1964 to build the Holiday Inn. I knew a lady who grew up there. But again, at the time of the battle, it's open in front of that house leading towards the edge of the town where, again, we know the bullet came from. Here's something I just discovered. 1946. How about this? We're at the Adams County Jail on East High Street, and we're looking across the wall of the jail towards Cemetery Hill with the new high school. Isn't that an awesome view? Look how the wall is falling down, and they have supports trying to hold up the prison wall. Now, do you know, in it was at this time of this photograph that they moved the jail out to Carlisle Street on the northern side of the town. And from the 40s until 2004, the jail was there. And then the jail moved out Route 30 to Granite Station Road, and then the county sold, or gave, depending on how you want to qualify, the property to the Adams County Historical Society. We tore down the jail, and that's the site where we're building our new building, on the site of the jail. But this is the original jail, and then of course this jail turned into a library for the county, and then the post office moved out of town, and the library moved into the post office, and then we put the mayor's office inside the old jail where he belongs. I'm just teasing. I like the mayor. But look at the wall falling down. Now, you know what I always thought? Two things. I always thought that Confederate soldiers stood somehow on the up near the top wall of the jail and fired at Cemetery Hill during the battle. I had that distinct impression they were firing from the jail. How did they do that? Unless they rigged up something they could stand on and fire over the wall. I'd imagine like a castle wall, I guess. Yeah. And then, of course, you know, in the courtyard of the jail, there were hangings. That's where a few people were executed. Here's another view.
Is that the cyclorama?
Yes, there you go. There you go. Since you asked that.
I wrecked it for you.
No, it's good. No, it's good. Look. So here is the view from the jail, looking directly to Cemetery Hill. And what's that big building in the center? The Cyclorama building on Cemetery Hill. Isn't that cool? And then, of course, you can see the New York monument, the soldier on the monument, or it's actually the goddess of victory or something on the monument there in the National Cemetery. So we're looking across that area, and we're looking up Hillcrest, and that's, of course, where the Louisiana Tigers charged up East Cemetery Hill during the battle. Let's see how we're doing. Oh, we still got a couple minutes before that. So I wanted to run through some other photographs we have of this area. Again, you're going to know more about what this area looks like than any other people. Maybe you don't need to know. Let's talk about the Wagon Hotel at the intersection of the Emmitsburg Road and the Baltimore Turnpike. The Wagon Hotel dates from like the 1820s. It was a drover's hotel. Out behind it, there was a huge livery stable where you put your horses for the night, and beyond that there was a huge field leading up to the area where the cemetery now is located, and people drove cattle and caravans of wagons and parked in the field and stayed at the hotel. And there's some really good accounts of how lively that place was, especially during the 1840s and 50s when German immigrants were coming into the port of Baltimore, and then there was these large caravans of immigrants coming through this area, and the Germans were then sweeping north and into western Pennsylvania from this area. So it's a very happening hotel. During the Battle of Gettysburg, the Northern Army fell back to Cemetery Hill, and during the second and third day of the battle, squads of Northern soldiers occupied the Eagle Hotel. They broke the windows out of the front of the building, they punched holes in the roof, and from this vantage point, they fired down the street at the buildings on both sides of Baltimore Street, at the sharpshooters of the Southern Army who occupied the buildings. And it was just a great vantage point. Now again, to the left, where there's a sidewalk and there's people walking up the sidewalk, if we could see farther to the left, we could get the view I'd really like to see of the Jennie Wade house sitting on that little high ground exposed to the fire of these Southern sharpshooters at the edge of the town. Here's an 1880s colorized view of the intersection of the Emmitsburg Road and the Baltimore Turnpike. So this is a magic lantern slide colorized. So I guess, you know, this is hand tinted. So I guess you have to guess that the things in the road are brown, you know, when you colorize something like this. You didn't get that? But you can see the sidewalk. You know, I love the sidewalk, the granite slabs that go across the road there. And, you know, for people who were in the program a few weeks ago, I already pointed this out, but here's my 1888 view of veterans at the Wagon Hotel, or at this time the sign says the Battlefield Hotel. And again, outer post of the Union sharpshooters. This is from an 1880 illustration. And out in the distance, you can see the barn associated with the Dobbin House that was also used by Union and Confederate sharpshooters at different points in the battle. And all the buildings at the edge of the town, were used by one side or the other. And some of the buildings that were caught in the middle, like John Rupp's house, or maybe out here on Steinway Avenue, Melinda Frazier's house, they changed hands during the fighting as sharpshooters advanced back and forth. And here's another view I have of the, just got recently, of the Wagon Hotel, or the Battlefield Hotel. That's the one from the 1888 reunion. Here's a view that maybe you haven't seen. I just put this in the show. I did not have this in here a few weeks ago when we talked about this topic. But here is the Battlefield Hotel from a early 1900s view. And you can, I should have made it so you can see it better, but the Jennie House is there to the left of the hotel. You can see the front of it, the windows. But isn't that interesting? And there's a big sign on the front that says, chicken and waffles. That's big amongst Pennsylvania Dutch. Chicken and waffles. I was telling Libby about putting something on the menu here that's got a historical flair. Yeah.
Waffle House just got it.
Waffle House, we've got chicken and waffles.
Just chicken and waffles.
Oh, with nice gravy on it. It seems so odd to me.
Yeah.
And then, of course, here's this view of the hotel in the 1920s. And it burned to the ground in the 1940s in a horrible fire. And when it burned to the ground, what did they rebuild at that site? There's a 1947 photograph. And so you can see pretty much the gas station that later turned into a convenience store. You know what I like about this photograph, though? If you look down the street beyond the Gulf Station, there's a stable. The stable for the Battlefield Hotel still stood. And then in, I think, 1949, they tore the stable down and they built the Battlefield Tavern, which later became Fujiya, and later became O'Rourke's. So O'Rourke's building is not there yet, but the Gulf Station is. Okay, let's stop right there for a moment, because oh, Andy just disappeared. We have to do the raffle. You know where we put the raffle tickets? Okay, I have to wait for all the smokers and stuff to get back in.
Some of us are already back.
Some of you are back. Okay. Okay, so we'll continue on here. I'm sure other people are wondering as we go. So we have a view taken in July of 1863 from the top of the Evergreen Cemetery Gatehouse. And I think it's really interesting. I've been there a bunch of times to the Evergreen Cemetery Gatehouse. Of course, I'm sure that you know I am the president of the Evergreen Cemetery Association. And from the top of the gatehouse, Alexander Gardner took his camera up there. There's no window. There's nothing on the side of the building. He had to somehow put a ladder against the side of the building and climb up it to get a camera up there. But he took this view. So we're looking north along the Baltimore Pike, across what is now the Tourist Center parking lot. You see all the tents? The tents of like the 36th Pennsylvania, what do they call it, militia that was camped in Gettysburg after the battle, Provost Guard cleaning up. And then if you look down the street there, you can see the Wagon Hotel to the left, the back of the Wagon Hotel, and the white building to the right of the Wagon Hotel, that's the Conrad Schneider house. And it has 3 sections built onto it, and if you look beyond it, there are 2 smokestacks sticking up, that's the Jennie house. And then you can see all that big, vast open field across what is South Street. There's a lane running through the middle of the field. That's South Street, out here behind the building. And then beyond it, the next buildings are on Breckenridge Street. And here's kind of a nicer, a different version of it where I could blow up that section. But you can kind of see on the right in the background is Breckenridge Street, and on the left in the background, that's Washington Street. So they're out here beyond the parking area and out in that direction towards the hospital. That area is just wide open. And I always imagine that the stream that runs back here, behind the Farnsworth house and runs along the alley and up behind the Dobbin house, that must have been like a trench just filled with Southern sharpshooters during the fighting, firing up at Cemetery Hill. And as we all know, so many Confederate sharpshooters were killed in the stream bed that their bodies fell over and they formed a human dam that backed up the water and drowned all the wounded in the southern portion of the town during the battle. I hear that all the time standing out back. Okay. I was also liking this view. You see the Wagon Hotel and the Conrad Schneider house to the right. I like how the Schneider house has been built onto multiple times. Looks kind of funny, doesn't it? And I want to talk about that in Schneider's in a moment, but I just also wanted to point out the photographic wagon, the darkroom wagon at the tour center parking lot down near at the bottom of the view. So somehow, and this is what, if you ever see Rob Gibson's programs or talk to Rob Gibson, this guy's on top of the roof and he exposes the glass plate negative and then puts it back in the box. And someone has to climb down a ladder in the building and run to the darkroom wagon. It's only got a few seconds to get that there and put the chemicals on it to expose it. And Gibson's always talking about what a chore that must have been, something like this. So here's another view. This is 1865. And this view is taken at the time of the cornerstone laying of the Soldiers National Memorial in the National Cemetery. And we're standing in the street up near Hoof, Finn, and Fowl. The tour center parking lot will be on our right. And we're looking north along Baltimore Street. And the Conrad Schneider house, again, whitewashed, painted white, is there on the right. And on the left is the Wagon Hotel with our laundry out. And we're looking down the street. You can see kind of the Tawny house there, and then the Rupp house, and then the Tannery smokestack in the distance in this view, which I think is a great view. We have an 1867 view of the Wagon Hotel. You can kind of see what the back of the Wagon Hotel looks like with a little bit of the stable attached to it. And then to the right of the Wagon Hotel, we're looking across the Rupp house with the smokestack of the tannery in the distance. So you kind of see that there. We have an 1863 drawing done by Alfred Woad. You can see ARW there on the right. And it says, entrance to Gettysburg, sharpshooting in the houses. And there's a dead soldier in the street in front of the David Studi house, again, which is where the Hoof, Finn, and Fowl is. And we're looking northward along the street towards the Farnsworth house in that view. So we have a lot of illustrations of what this area looked like. And here's an 1878 view. And this is one of the veterans' encampments that was held yearly starting in 1878. It might be, but we're at the tower on East Cemetery Hill, the tourist tower, and we're looking down the Baltimore Pike. And I think the next view, I just have the top right-hand portion of this photograph blown up. And you can kind of see, again, beyond the stables of the Wagon Hotel and the David Studi house, you can see across the fields towards Washington Street and see how all that area is just wide open. So there are sharpshooters at the edge of the town, and there are northern sharpshooters on Cemetery Hill, and they're between the buildings and behind the fences and the bushes and the orchards. But there's not a lot between these two areas. There's a lot of open ground, and sharpshooters have to be very careful about what ground they occupy so they won't get picked off. Here's a view from the National Cemetery, I think from like 1869, and on the right of the view, the Dobbin House would be in the trees on the left of the view, but on the right of the view is the Samuel Philby house and probably the David Studi barn all the way on the right. And again, they're the buildings on Steinway Avenue that were there at the time, and you kind of get an idea that between that and, again, Breckenridge Street and Washington Street, it's pretty open from Cemetery Hill looking on. I always like to make mention of the fact that on July 2nd, Jennie Wade and her family are in the McCullen house. On the evening of July 1st, or the afternoon of July 1st, Jennie left her house on Breckenridge Street. With her were her young brother Harry and a boy that the family was looking after at the time, a guy named Isaac Brinkerhoff, who was apparently a crippled boy. And Jennie took the two boys and she joined her mother and her sister. And of course, Georgia, her sister, had given birth to a child on June 26th at her house on Cemetery Hill. And that group of people was in the McCullen house on the second and third day of the battle. On the evening of July 2nd, the Louisiana Tigers and the North Carolina Tar Heels came out of the gully there where the junior high school is now, middle school I should say, and they charged up Cemetery Hill. And there's heavy fighting during the battle on Cemetery Hill. And I don't think people understand that the right flank of that attack, the Louisiana Tigers would be the right flank would be the 5th and the 6th Louisiana Infantry, charged right up the field on the edge of Baltimore Street, and they would have passed directly to the east of the Jennie Wade house and charged up to East Cemetery Hill. And it would be heavy fighting around that house. And that would have shocked and scared the family. There's no doubt about that. And in most of the books written on the battle, or I should say on the Jennie Wade house, they don't mention the fighting that took place around the house on July 2nd. And that would have been a major event that occurred there. Now, during the afternoon of July 2nd preceding the attack, an artillery shell entered the roof of the house and passed through the upper story of the house and lodged on the southern side of the house. And then the Louisiana Tigers were repulsed, and it was quiet. Why did they not move the family out of the house?
There you go, Matt.
This is Matt's favorite thing to talk about. And so I've done a little more research on this, and it's fascinating to me. I don't have an answer to this question, and I wrote down here in my notes that every time I answer this question for people, they walk away very unsatisfied with my answer. Perhaps they didn't know the family was in the house. I don't think that's true. Perhaps they went to the house and asked the family to go, and they're like, no. She just gave birth, she's having complications, she cannot be moved. Oh, okay. Let's leave the family there. Perhaps the person in charge of that area of the line for the Northern Army told someone to move them out of the house, and for whatever reason that person didn't do it. But that family was allowed there. Now, if we examine all the different families in the area and their accounts of the battle find out some pretty interesting things. First of all, the Southern Army occupied the edge of the town. John Rupp is in his basement. He sends his family away, but nobody tells him to leave the house. The Weinbrenner family is over here in John Weinbrenner's house, and they hide in the basement, and there's a clear account of that. No Southern soldiers are telling them to leave the house. All along Breckenridge Street, all the families are in their houses, and no one tells them to leave. Harvey Sweeney and the family that lived with him, the Wakert family, are in this house, and nobody tells them to leave. But again, they're Southerners. They're in a northern occupied area of the town. I mean, a northern occupied town. They're not, the Southerners aren't ordering the northern soldiers out of the buildings. On Washington Street, where the Gettysburg's Internal Medicine, the stone building over there is near the hospital, the Colt family is in the basement of that house. But it's a different story up on Cemetery Hill. Elizabeth Thorne has a specific mention in her account that General Howard comes down and orders the family to leave. And they're not allowed to take anything, grab the children, and go. And he has a staff officer usher them out. In the Wagon Hotel, we have an account by Amanda Homan, and she works at the Wagon Hotel, and they're huddled in the basement of the Wagon Hotel, and Union soldiers come in and say, okay, you're out of here now. She doesn't say when this happened, whether it was the second or the morning of the third day, but she does say that they brought them upstairs and they went out the back door of the house, and he made them run serpentine through the orchard to get to Cemetery Hill because he was afraid they would be fired at. The Fraser family leave their house. The Ogden family leave their house. We have no account of the Philby family, but we assume they were ordered out of the house. On July 1st, General John Fulton Reynolds has staff officers at the western edge of the town ordering the people out of their homes and ordering them to vacate the area. But it was a different story with the two houses that we're talking about on the east side of the Baltimore Pike. Jennie Wade, her mother, her sister, her brother, the young crippled boy Isaac Brinkerhoff, and the child that was born on June 26th, they're all in that house. And on the northern side of the house is the McLean family. And Catherine McLean, I think it's McLean, and her father and her children are all huddled in the basement of that house. Her father, Isaac McLean, had been killed in the 165th Pennsylvania in Suffolk, Virginia, a few weeks before the battle, I think in May. And she has an infant too. She gave birth, Catherine McLean gave birth to a child in May. So she has an infant. And they're in the house. And the Schneider house that we just talked about, the whitewashed house up there, Catherine Schneider gets really concerned for her children when some wounded are brought into the house and a guy's arm is like, hanging in shreds, and she doesn't want her children to be exposed to this. So she sends the oldest daughter with the youngest children to her sister's house, who is the wife of Benner on Benner's Hill. Susan Benner, I think, is her sister. So she sends those children away, but her daughter Lucinda and her in the house there also during the battle. So for whatever reason, and we have no explanation of why, these families were allowed to stay in those two buildings during the battle when all the other families were ordered out and sent away. Now, Union soldiers will say, well, and here's the thing, there's a lot written about Jennie Wade and her story afterwards, and I get distinct impression that some of the people involved would rather not talk about this subject, and they make up things that they say things. Oh, there was an understanding that there were civilians in that building and it was not to be fired upon. The Union Army maintains in some of their accounts, the Union soldiers writing later, that Northerners did not occupy the Jennie Wade house during the battle. They were in front of it, they were behind it, they were on the sides of it, but they didn't occupy it because there were civilians in it. And then here's the other thing. Let's say this is true. Let's say that on July 2nd, the Southern sharpshooters at the edge of the town, Dole's brigade, Georgians, have an understanding that the family's in that building and they're not going to fire upon the building. Dole's brigades pulled out on the evening of July 2nd. The Louisiana Tigers are pulled back into the swale, and then the Louisiana Tigers are sent into the edge of the town in the middle of the night, and at daybreak on July 3rd, the Louisiana Tigers occupy Baltimore Street. The 5th Alabama Battalion of Sharpshooters attached to O'Neill's brigade are shifted into the town on the morning of the 3rd day of the battle. So all of a sudden, there's all these new people in the town during the battle. And the Union Army, the same thing. Sharpshooter units were pulled out, sent back to Cemetery Hill, and different units were sent into the town. So all of a sudden, on the morning of July 3rd, there are all these new units positioned around the house. Come on. They don't have any idea that this house is occupied by civilians. Why would it be occupied by civilians? How come someone didn't make sure the civilians were out of this building? She can't be moved, Matt.
But it's not the army that I've always quibbled with. It's the people in the house. Why do you want to get out of it?
You got to get out of the house.
Get out of the house. You got a baby and a frail woman.
Yeah.
Oh, so I guess the soldiers needed their bread.
She needed the dough.
That's right.
She needed the dough.
So also we should point out this, Matt, that the front door of the house opens towards the Confederate sharpshooter fire at the edge of the town.
Right.
And there is no way to get out. Now you could go out the side door. You could break through the wall
When did the shell go through?
on July 2nd.
July 2nd. So
Yeah.
you could have.
So I think the night of July 2nd is the opportunity for the family to get out of the
What
house.
did they do with her body after she was killed?
They
Where did
went up
take
through, they broke a hole in the
the
wall.
hole
took
in
it
the
through.
wall that the shell made.
Well, by that point,
They
it was,
could've done-
they realized that people could get killed.
Yeah, right.
And they did an autopsy to see what the bullet was.
And then, and then also, the thing about it is bullets are flying through the house during July 2nd and hitting the wall and almost killing people. So, I don't know, it's an interesting question, I think. Oh, we have our map from John Wayne Johnston's book that shows you artillery shell coming through the wall on July 2nd. But I think, I guess my point, one of my points is that for some reason, the families were not ordered out of these houses. And number two, I can tell by reading the accounts that some of the people that are writing about it are a little bit uneasy with the fact that they didn't do something about moving his family. And I would say this, the family itself probably feels really bad about it. Georgia probably feels like she's to blame because she couldn't be moved. Do you think, is Georgia telling her mom, no, I'm going to stay, I can't be moved? So here is, if you go up there today and you can take all these things we're saying in. Now, in 1917, John Wayne Johnston, well, the basic story is in 1913, John Wayne Johnston came to Gettysburg and he visited the Jennie Wade house and he met Georgia Wade McClellan. She had come from Iowa and she was at the Jennie Wade house and he met her and he decided that he was fascinated by the story. So he did research, he hired a local historian to help him, and eventually, 1917, a few years later, they wrote a book about the true story of Jennie Wade. I had this book when I was younger. I bought it at I guess I got it at one of the shows, one of the collector shows. And I was always fascinated by it. A big fan of John Wayne Johnston. Of course, you guys know, I'm sure you guys know the backstory. He also was going to write a book about John Burns, but he never did. And I found out that his collection of manuscript material for his book was at the Rochester Museum and Science Center. And so I went there, copied all his material, and I published his book. with some additions of my own. But I was enamored by this historian that was going to write a book about John Burns. Well, while I was there, he has all this cool stuff about Jennie Wade. Now, just a few years ago, I'm going to say it was 3 years ago, out of the blue, John Wayne Johnston's granddaughter called me on the phone at the Historical Society. and said, hey, do you know my grandfather was going to publish a second edition of the book with all new material? But he got, something happened, he never published it. I have the edition with all the corrections and changes he was going to make in it. So now I have access to this. Oh, here's John Wayne Johnston and Georgia Wade McCullough, Jennie's sister. And I have all this new material with these notes pasted into it. And one of the notes that shocked me was this one. Georgia says that there were Union sharpshooters in the house, and they should be blamed for bringing on her sister's death. And here, in a footnote, she says, we did not know the sharpshooters were in the house until after my sister was killed. I screamed, and they ran downstairs. General Howard ordered the men arrested and put in the guardhouse for being around my house. The upstairs was not occupied by the family, nor did we know that sharpshooters were there. The last time General Howard visited me in Denison, Iowa, he spoke of the incident, and that was in 1881. Isn't that fascinating? Now, am I going to be able to find at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., a court-martial file for the soldiers that were in the house? Man, I don't think so. And but it's not the first time. When I was writing, you guys might know I'm working on a Jennie Wade book. I've been working on it for a couple of years now. Seriously working on it. I've been working on it all my life. But I found another account where she goes off on the Union sharpshooters being in her house. So she claims that sharpshooters snuck into the house without her knowledge, maybe from the other side, maybe they climbed through the hole, maybe they had busted the hole in the wall at that moment, maybe they did it afterwards, and they were firing out the top windows of the house, because there are windows overlooking the Wagon Hotel, and they're firing, and they drew fire on the house. Of course, again, I like that she blamed Georgia more than, the soldiers. Maybe they should get out of the house.
Yeah, not Georgia, but
anybody.
Yeah.
So here's another thing that I love. I love this in this book. We're talking about this new edition. And of course, I had permission from the granddaughter to use the revised edition in my book. But look at this thing she put in here. John Wayne Johnson puts in here. Page 21, last edition. Every pane of glass was soon broken. And then he's going to put this in there. Bullet marks in Jennie Wade house. The north side, 28 marks in brick wall. The north side, 5 marks over jet, windows. 6 bullet holes in door. West window, 1 through both window sashes. East, bullet through the center sash. East, frame through corner. So they have a list of where the bullet holes are in the house. There's not 100 bullet holes in the house, even though every account says there is. Did you ever try to count 100 on it? It's not 100. Like the Farnsworth house, did you ever count 100 there on the side? It's not 100. But that's a lot. And then, of course, he has this map in his book, and this is from the original copy, that shows the bullet. And, I just want you to look at the map, not the bullet that comes through the window and hits above the fireplace, or the mantle, but on the right, where the dough tray is, and the bullet coming through the door. Do you see that the bullet is on a slight, it has a slight course to it, indicating that it comes from down Baltimore Street, maybe on the other side of the road, maybe just from this area. It's crazy. And the bullet from the one door to the other door is slightly rising when it comes through.
Where's Jennie in that, Tim? Point to Jennie.
Jennie would be at the dough tray, so she is like right here.
Okay.
And you know, one thing that's not known generally or not talked about is Jennie's mother is putting wood in the fire and has her back to Jennie, is in the same exact room with her. And you know, when the story is, when Jennie's mom is down there and she's putting wood in the fire and the bullet goes through both doors, crack, crack, and Jennie falls over, and the mom turns and looks at Jennie, and then the mom just walks into the other room and says, Georgia, your sister is dead. Very calmly. And according to Georgia, she screams. And that's when the soldiers, you know, come running downstairs. That's what she says later. So again, in the book by John Lloyd Johnston, you can see that the bullet is coming from near this end of town. And, you know, great question I just had. You often hear from people around town, well, the door on the Jennie Wade house isn't the same door. They replaced the doors years ago. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. This is a photograph from 1917 of the door in John Lloyd Johnston book. And you can look at the door today, and it's the same door. And you could say, well, they made another door, and they made it look exactly like the one that it was used to by putting the cracks in the same place and putting holes in the exact place. These people are not going to be that, you know, savvy. If they're going to replace the door, it's not going to look exactly like the door today. And I can tell you, I've been convinced all my life it's the same door. Now, whether it's been adjusted slightly, you know, and that could cause some problems with the trajectory. I can't say that. Trajectory. The bullet path. Good. And then, of course, the other thing that messes with the bullet path is single women, you know, trying to, you know, hope for the future by sticking their finger in the bullet hole, because they tell you there, if you stick your finger in the bullet hole, then you're going to get married within a year, you know. And that story has been told over and over again. I forget when I first found the story in a newspaper article. It was in the 1930s. But women have been sticking their fingers in the bullet hole and you know, twirling around and getting it wider and wider. So, you know, we'll never know exactly where the bullet hole came from. Here's a photograph I took from near the dough tray, looking through the inside door out through the outer door. And of course, like I say today, when you look through, all you do is see the side of the Holiday Inn. Oh, if we tear down the Holiday Inn, we'll know where the bullet came from.
Keep Gary on it.
Yeah. So, one thing I want to mention, a lot of people say, oh, the bullet could not have passed through two doors because her big oak doors are thick. Of course, they're not oak, they're pine. Yeah, and the other thing is, do you see how the bullet didn't pass through the thick part of the door? It passed through the what do you call that part of it, around the frame, you know, in the thin part of it. And, but here's the thing. So, this summer, one day, out of the blue again, I'm at the Historical Society, and I get this call, and it's an author. You know, I get a lot of calls from Civil War authors. And, you know, he knew I did research on Jennie Wade, and I talked about Jennie Wade. And he was like, hey, I'm writing a book called Civil War Casualties. I was like, oh, that's nice. He said, oh, I have a chapter on Jennie Wade. I'm like, oh, that's great. And he is a crime scene investigator. So I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then he said, I graduated from the University of West Virginia, and do you know they have a crime lab there? And I do know this because Brooke here, Libby's daughter, went to University of West Virginia, and when we were there, I was all about the crime lab. Do you know they have a whole department of forensic medicine? Is that forensics medicine? What's that called? Forensics? Okay, not medicine, forensics. And he knew the guy there, and his idea was to have, he has a chapter on Sedgwick being killed by a sharpshooter, and, you know, 600-800 yards, and then he's got a chapter on Reynolds' death, and he said, I want to do something on Jennie Wade, I wanted some civilian stuff in there, and so how about if I bring the University of West Virginia's crime lab to the Jennie Wade house. It's like, wow, that's awesome. So I arranged it, and on November 11th, we brought the University of West Virginia crime lab there. And this guy was out of control with his gadgets. He was all over the place. And he was there most of the day. Now, I'll tell you right now that they're still working, his students are still working on the conclusions that they're coming up with during this analysis. They even went to a field afterwards with Civil War variety of muskets, including an Enfield musket, and they fired bullets through 2 doors at different distances to try to, see what the impact would be. But he analyzed the bullet holes in the building, and of course I was the historian. And they took some analysis of everything there. I thought it was great. And here's the outside door from the inside showing the bullet holes. There's a bunch of bullet holes in the house, not just the one that supposedly Jennie was killed. And what they did is kind of interesting. They put rolled out a piece of thick paper on the floor, and then they took the inside door and they marked it off on the paper at different angles, because we know the outside door of the house is closed, but we don't know the inside door between the bedroom and the dining room was open slightly and how far it was ajar. So they put it at different angles, and they're like at 90 degrees, then they shot, a beam, laser, yeah. And then, they did it at 40 degrees and 35 degrees, and they tried to predict the range of what we're talking about, where the bullet could have come from. Isn't that fascinating? Because anytime you use a protractor, I really, really like that. Love that. And then they shot some lasers at the different angles of the door. So we have not yet received the results. But, I'm thinking that after all this work, all we're going to find out is the bullet came from somewhere in here. Something that we suspect all along. But for me, that's very exciting that, will we find out that the bullet came from this area, from the office of the tannery, or, from the window of the Farnsworth house. I told them we should do a documentary. We should get, somebody's got to be interested in this as a documentary, don't you think?
We should do at least a show.
Yeah. We'll do a crime scene investigation show. So, on the 4th of July, can you imagine Georgia Wade McClellan with her infant child standing at the grave of her sister? Do you think she feels guilty about the whole thing?
Sure.
She moved away from Gettysburg, never to return. Well, except during tourist season.
Okay. On the 4th, but not the 2nd.
No, 4th of July is when she's buried.
I know.
Yeah.
But if she was outside, she could have left the house on the 2nd.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
If she was at...
Yeah, on the 3rd, well, after she's killed, they bring her through the wall. Yeah. And should I mention the 4th of July, 1863, was Georgia Wade McClellan's 22nd birthday. It was her birthday. So, I think that's all I have. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, how did that happen? I want to thank everybody for coming to the program. Does anybody have any questions about Jennie Wade? Do you want to ask? You're allowed to ask questions. I already talked about her death, not her life or anything.
So when they left Breckenridge Street, did anyone occupy the building?
Good question. When they left Breckenridge Street, did Confederate sharpshooters then occupy the building?
Right.
I would say no, because it's a 1.5-story building. And so the roof slants the wrong way, as opposed to like the Bushman house next door, which is a couple-story building. And we do have, I think, the Weikerts? No. trying to think what the other name of the person on the street, Wireman. There's another family on the street that did leave an account of sharpshooters occupying their building, but closer to Baltimore Street. And also living on the street at the time of the battle are Barbahian, the Barbahian family. I know that one. Why can't I think of the name of the guy who lived there? But I can think of it.
When Georgia Wade McClellan moved to Denison, Iowa, she joined a women's relief organization.
Yeah. So
is that still around today?
I don't know if it's around today, but she moved to Carroll, Iowa, and later Denison. But when they lived in Carroll, Iowa, then she was part of this Women's Relief Corps of Iowa, and she became the state representative of the Women's Relief Corps, the Iowa representative. And then, she retired, and they wanted to honor her in some way, and so they're the ones that put up the monument on Jennie Wade's grave to honor Jennie Wade's sacrifice, baking bread for the soldiers and being excellently killed during the battle. But it was really to help honor her sister, who had done an amazing amount of work for Union veterans after the Civil War, and caring for them in their as they got older, with their Civil War wounds. So really, the Women's Relief Corps of Iowa was a organization that helped soldiers later in their lives.
I had heard that they still send the flags that fly.
They used to. Good question. And I might know about this because I am the president of Evergreen Cemetery. But the state of Iowa used to send us a flag to fly over Jennie Wade's grave every 6 months. Starting in the monument's from 1901, but starting in 1910, they put an American flag on the grave, and every 6 months the state of Iowa sent us that flag. They stopped doing it a few years ago, so they don't send us flags anymore. We have to supply the flags on Jennie Wade's grave ourselves.
You don't have to answer this, but if you're part of the Evergreen organization, do you have plots there?
Yes. If you want to be on the board of Evergreen Cemetery and you want to someday ascribe to be the president of Evergreen Cemetery, you must have a plot there. Yeah, you can't. Yeah, you have to. That's plot owners. We have a yearly meeting in June of plot owners, people that have plots in the cemetery, and they come to the meeting, and then they elect people to the board, and then the board elects officers. So you have to have a plot there. So if you want to be on the board, you have to get a plot. And usually, depending on how busy or controversial our business is at our business meeting, we usually have between 1 and 3 people show up to the meetings. It's really usually a good turnout.
Must be a dead meeting.
Yeah. There's all kinds of cemetery jokes we could go. Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming on my presentation. Jennie Wade's grave?
Yes.
No. Because she wasn't.